tell me a little bit more about your perspectives on how your portfolio companies are using generative AI. Start by introducing yourself just so folks know who you are.
Fantastic. I'm Monica Brand Engel. I'm co-founder and managing partner of Quona Capital. Quona is a venture firm focused on fintech for inclusion in emerging markets. We have 800 million assets under management, 70 portfolio companies across South and Southeast Asia, Latin America, Africa, and MENA.
Tell me about how your portfolio companies are using generative AI. What have you seen?
So interestingly, we have discovered kind of three core use cases of generative AI,
Mhm.
and I would put these in the bucket of applications versus businesses that have been built around generative AI as a thesis. And if I were
Mhm.
to categorize them, the first one is in the easiest of automation. So taking operationally intensive tasks through workflow automation and using generative AI to bring efficiencies to the business. The second example, an example there would be Sunday, which is a insurtech company we have in Southeast Asia, and they use generative AI to automate claims adjust
Mhm.
education by leveraging language models and to basically read through deep documentation in order to decide which claims can automatically paid versus which ones might need further follow-up. The second use case is really around personalized customer experiences. Again, and it's amazing. We did a webinar on one of them. Clar is a challenger bank in Mexico, and it has used generative AI not only as part of its credit underwriting, but actually to understand and evaluate the behavior, lending and savings behavior of its
Mhm.
customers to begin offering it new products. So literally have a bot that would say, you seem to be keeping a lot of money in cash in a non-interest bearing account. Do you know that we have this yield bearing account, even though that would be a money loser for Clark because they'd be paying for deposits that right now are sitting idle, but they do it as a way of increasing fidelity of their customers and actually has
Sure.
shown to actually improve retention. So an example, and there's others that we have in our portfolio of personalizing
Mhm.
financial services for small consumers and small businesses that would be impossible without some technology, in this case, generative AI support. And the third use case is on data augmentation and insights. And this is an example, either of credit underwriting or other ways to really manage risk on one
Mhm.
side. Basically, really, I guess it's risk management because
Mhm.
underwriting is a form of risk management. And maybe the best example there is Julo, which is a kind of consumer finance company based in Indonesia. And or maybe Verto. I'll use Verto just to go through all of our regions. Verto, which is a cross-border payments company,
Mhm.
leveraging AI actually to help them with AML, the anti-money laundering.
Mhm.
They look at documents they get, hundreds of hits to use their system. And because they are regulated both in the UK by the FCA, as well as in the jurisdictions in Africa and MENA where they operate, they need to have tight anti-money laundering
Mhm.
rules. And it's very time and labor intensive. And they use their tools to actually figure out which ones actually to detect fraud, if you will. So it's again, rather than having people, they use these large language models and then we'll filter out anything that's not deterministic to a
Mhm.
person to adjudicate.
Now, let's talk a little bit about how people feel about using this. So, with personalization, for example,
Mhm.
your second case study, when people get that and they see and they observe that, hey, generative AI is suggesting something to me, are they grateful? Are they creeped out? Like, what's the psychology involved here? Like, how are people feeling about interacting with generative AI? Not even inside the company. I want to talk separately about inside the company, but how are the users who are interacting with the generative AI tool, how are they responding to it?
It's a fascinating question. And I would say that answer to your question is actually tied to the digitization journey our countries are on and our customers are on.
Hmm.
So, First answer is that in many of the markets where we work, it has historically been very paper and people intensive and very
Hmm.
cash intensive. And so they are used to having a person and a,
Yeah.
kind of a very laborious process. That's their experience. And to shift them to one that's digital, even without bringing in generative AI, just, sort of getting a
Hmm.
text versus a phone call. It is, something that is, I think in the beginning, it is an adjustment. But what we
Hmm.
found, just the way moving from, again, phone call to a text, that's an adjustment and to understand what are the benefits for me.
Hmm. Hmm.
And also what's fascinating with generative AI and how quickly the technology is developing, there's now voice involved. So now you
Yeah.
can have actually interact with where it sounds like a person in, and
Mm.
you actually can even have them speak in the local dialect or language.
Mm.
So
Mm.
yes, there is an adjustment, like the way anytime, even ourselves going to an airport, where we used to have an agent and now you do everything at a kiosk. Like all of
Mhm.
these are a little bit of adjustment. And who doesn't want to have personalized services? But what the beauty of generative AI is that it can simulate, even to the
Mhm.
extent of languages and accents and literally languages, dialects that are
Mhm.
only spoken in certain places that would be, again, impossible to provide cost effectively.
Mhm.
So what we found is that, like all new behaviors and new technologies, it takes an adjustment, but at the end, they
Mhm.
really embrace it because of the value, the corresponding value it brings.
Mhm. Do you find that there's different customer segments who embrace it quicker versus not, or is it personality types? Because I've definitely seen with working with companies embracing generative AI in their products that they're seeing some younger folks embracing it more quickly, but older users who are much more reluctant and they see it as kind of a uncanny valley, and they're like, no, 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 let me deal with my old human or the old tools. I don't want to deal with this new fangled tool. What are you seeing there?
I would say, and it's another good point, I would say younger generations are more digitally native, is the
Mhm.
word we use to describe it. And also, again, one of the reasons we work in countries, not just like India and Brazil or Mexico or Southeast Asia or Africa, is that demographically they are younger. So there
Mhm.
is a way in which the countries and markets we're working on lend themselves to quicker adoption. The
Mhm.
second reason why, again, we see a high adoption among our very, I would say, modest in terms of their income level or education level, is that
Mhm.
their quality of services now are so bad. It is not
Um,
like they're dropping, so it's like they're usually asked to wait in long lines, or if they're given the service
mhm.
at all, so it's just, and also there's usually certain hours of operation that, are,
Mhm.
not this when they're working themselves. So it usually means literally either nothing,
Mhm.
or if there is something, it is such poor quality that
Mhm.
they can get over the generative AI. I think the real issue is on the trust
Mhm.
factor because there are people who abuse technology.
Yeah.
And so that I think is more of the risk. It's less the willingness to switch. It's making
Mhm.
sure this is a legitimate offer.
So how do you deal with the trust factor, making sure it is a legitimate offer?
Well, part of it is, again, the companies we work with. You remember the portfolio that Quona has built.
Yeah.
These are, we call them performance with purpose companies. So all of these companies are high performing, striving to build very profitable companies and deliver a
Mhm.
return to their investors. But they also are purpose driven. They always measure the impact. So
Mhm.
part of it is that their whole positioning in the market, their whole approach and go to market strategy is around this holistic one, a focus on a specific segment, usually the segment that others are excluding. So one is that they
Mhm.
take the people that others exclude. Two, they have been working with them. Remember, I mentioned these are not native generative AI. They've incorporated generative AI into an already product suite. So they already have built a relationship
Mhm.
of trust based on a real value proposition.
Mhm. Yeah.
Partly the brand and trust they've built through their relationship with them and through their brand in the
Mhm.
market, which is around, again, that, they're targeting an underserved segment. They want to improve value, and that's what they're advertising. So it's like truth in advertising. So everything reinforces each other, plus all the other experiences the customer has.
Mhm. Okay, so let's talk about the employees inside the company. So the ones that aren't built around you said most of them are not built around a generative AI. They are integrating generative AI into their product suite. And of course, that causes friction internally. So what have you seen about employees and how they respond to the adoption of generative AI tools?
Interestingly, again, they're like with all technology, you have to first overcome their fear. Like, so the fear
Hmm.
is that generative AI is to displace them, which is
Yep.
absolutely not the case. In all the examples I
Hmm.
gave, these companies are growing. They are not
Mm-hmm.
firing people. They're just putting the people
Mm-hmm.
into higher value added services. So when you begin to explain the technology, first how it works and understanding how it helps the customer, because a lot of these employees they join these companies because they believe in the mission. So they're very
Mm-hmm.
customer centric. And when they see the types of products that you can offer to a segment
Mm-hmm.
which before was prohibitively costly, that gets them
Mm-hmm.
bought in. Secondly, when you say, okay, your job, you are not going to do now the rote task. Like who wants to go through insurance claims? Like no one
Mm-hmm.
is like dying, pounding on the door to go through these very dense, oftentimes poorly organized, handwritten papers. So this notion of actually being able to do something that's higher value
Mm-hmm.
add is actually also quite exciting.
Mm-hmm.
And third, the company is more successful. So again, these are companies where we usually have ESOPs, employee stock options, variable pay. So when the company
Mm-hmm.
does better, which they will invariably by automating low
Yeah.
value added tasks, there is more for everyone to go around. So in
Mm-hmm.
general, there is always, just like with the customer journey, there's some skepticism, there's fear,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of education. And then the other thing that's very important is pilots. We don't just roll
Mm-hmm.
out these solutions, willy-nilly. We try them out in certain use
Mm-hmm.
cases, certain segments, and then as success and learnings happen, we integrate that and scale. So all of this is
Mm-hmm.
a process. It's not, and of course, there are, going to be, sort of bumps on the road. But I think
Yeah.
it's really, if you see, and again, that was what the research really just was. We were shocked to see how much progress and how quickly it's growing.
Mm. So tell me a little bit about some of the bumps on the road and how that was overcome.
Yeah, I mean, so an example, even maybe I'll use Quona, and I will say just in terms of the like where it's going. I think I've shared you that white paper where we show surveys of these portfolio companies using generative AI and their expectation that it's going to expand. But some of the bumps in the road are the following. One is data integrity. So to the extent that you
Mm.
have, it's like garbage in, garbage out. So to the
Yeah.
extent you have bad input, either because the
Mm-hmm.
customer mistyped something or in the intake or in the automating of what was
Mm-hmm.
written to digitize it, that is the first challenge. And so if you're starting with bad data, you're going to get bad results. So there have
Yeah.
been cases where the AI technology makes a suboptimal decision. That's probably
Mm-hmm.
one. Two is what I call digital readiness. That's not just of the end customer, that's also of the employee. So different
Mm-hmm.
employees, especially the age demographic you talked about, might have different levels of familiarity and comfort with
Mm-hmm.
using technology. And so I think that, the digital readiness, the digital acceptance or comfort of the employee also will impact, and you just have to account for that as you train and you roll out the pilot, that there's going to be a
Mm-hmm.
spectrum of readiness. And I think the third area is really around privacy and how you make sure you are balancing. We have double
Mm-hmm.
opt-in, we have ways of which how we use data, but we really want to make sure that we're being very careful about managing what gets fed into these machines versus what is
Mm-hmm.
sort of shared even among in these language models. So I think there's some of the learnings that we're progressing on, and even we as
Mm-hmm.
Quona trying to really become engaged in the ecosystem. I spoke at MIT last fall at a generative AI conference to really
Mm-hmm.
understand how do our peers also deal with these challenges.
Mm. Now, you talked about the data risks. What about issues around bias and hallucination? It's a big, big issue in insurance decision making. And how do you making decisions based on the data that's being fed in? And of course, with fintech companies, it's a big, big area. How are you addressing that?
No, it's a great question, and there are, and again, part of it's just the discovery to understand where those hallucinations are occurring. Part of it is on again the data integrity and making sure that we
Hmm.
are refining the models as we learn. Part of it is managing how quickly we scale and making sure we have a
Mm.
good. But what's most amazing is the technology itself is improving. So just as we
Hmm.
roll out
Yeah.
the hallucination occurrence is actually also moderating just in terms of the power of these models. So
Hmm.
it is definitely a risk, and it's why in all the models are described, there's not a pure generative AI. We even have a spectrum in our white paper where we describe this, and all of these are more on use cases and applications,
Hmm.
not on complete 100% um, full Oh, sorry, Dr. Webb. I hope you heard my answer. I just put myself on to make sure you heard my answer.
Yeah, we lost your video, so I can't
I can
see
put it
your.
back on. I just wanted to make sure you hear me. I can put it back on. Sometimes the voice integrity gets used up through the video.
Okay. Yes. Yep. Okay. Got it. All right. Cool. So going back to, so we're talking about bias and risk management. I want to check in about what is the structure that your portfolio companies put into place to manage the data privacy risk management place. Like, what is the governance of AI that's going on?
Yeah, no, that's also quite important. So all of our companies that are using generative AI have teams that are focused both on the risk management as well as on the operation. And so
Mhm,
first, there are rules and guidelines around what gets shared and what's not.
mhm,
We have multi-factor authentication in terms of who has access to different types of databases, and part of it's also an evaluation of results. We actually do back testing to see what's getting produced to really make sure that we have integrity in our systems. So there's a variety of, I call it internal controls that get applied for the generative AI.
mhm. And is there when for structurally, so you are investing into 70 companies, how is information shared? How do you share information from them? Like you're seeing probably some are more advanced than others. And what are you seeing and how are you communicating best practices among them?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question too. So we have two things. We do have data sharing requirements, reporting requirements. We ask of our all of
Mhm,
our portfolio companies that are tied to us being investors and demand for governance and transparency, as well as us curious around the impact these different services and
mhm,
interventions are having. So we do have reporting requirements. They're usually not at the level of the kind of data that you're describing, like asking for social security numbers or other, kind of very confidential data. Part of it is, there is a what I call like a Chinese wall in terms of what we see versus what our portfolio companies generate in their own
mhm,
systems. Um, it's never kind of been raised to kind of breach the systems. Again, we can make specific data requests. Like, for example, I'll give you an example. We have of late actually been curious around, is there any differences in gender experience on some of the end customers?
mhm,
On how they would experience their products or how they're underwritten. And interestingly, some of our companies like Confio did a fascinating study when they break down the data where actually women are actually turn out to be better repayers. They're actually
mhm,
have more loyalty. So sometimes we will ask the company, again, we won't see that data. We'll ask the company, can you filter the data this way and
mhm,
share the results? And interestingly, again, it's done usually, for example, in that one case, we were curious because
mhm,
there's one investor that wanted to understand, is there, kind of any bias? And interestingly, not only wasn't there a bias, it actually helped the company see that there might actually be an adjustment they want to make in their own algorithm in terms of how they risk and score a female
mhm,
client, male client based on the data. So
mhm,
it's a very arm's length relationship. Our portfolio companies, we are, minority investors. We never would have access to the databases, but we can query and they can say yes or no. They don't have to do it. Again, we're a minority investor, but
mhm.
it is very much an arm's length other than the reporting requirements that we have of all of our portfolio companies.
Okay. I was curious about education. So you said generative AI is getting better, and presumably it's not only the generative AI getting better, but you can also learn case studies from others outside of your current portfolio companies. You said you went to MIT. How is education on generative AI taking place inside the companies to make sure that the companies are using it most effectively?
Yeah, so sorry, and I think you alluded to that in your last question. We have it's probably our number one source of value add to our portfolio companies. Because we focus exclusively on fintech, do a lot of knowledge exchange. It's called our platform
Hmm.
function. And in that platform function, we have a variety of offerings. Some of them include town halls where we'll bring a portfolio company to actually speak and share, for
Hmm.
example, in this case, how they've applied generative AI in their own companies. Others are when
Hmm.
we bring in guest speakers, specialists in this area to actually begin talking about journeys in other more developed markets where the journey has been longer, where there are
Hmm.
bumps in the road that they can share. So that's another important way. And third is by introductions to specialist domain experts, where they actually might work as a consultant or even as a staff, depending on how uh, big the scope is of the generative AI application that we help provide through our networks and our knowledge. So those are probably the three most important ways we disseminate our learnings.
That's helpful. Now, as you're thinking about the future, where do you see generative AI heading within your portfolio companies? How are you seeing it making a difference in the next couple of years?
Yeah, no, great question. And actually, we asked this question around where we see it going. And interestingly, the first answer is they actually see more applications, particularly around automating more tools and actually leveraging some of the data they collect. Oftentimes, in many of these companies, the revenue model is based on something else other than the data. The data is just sort of a
Hmm.
byproduct. And so beginning to realize that that data is a really
Mhm.
valuable source of insights that they can both use to refine products as well as to offer new offerings. So I think one is on, product development is one for sure. Second is on operational efficiency as we share lessons. Like another example, Clara said that its cost to serve of its customers is the same as Nubank, even though Nubank is 50 times as large in terms of its portfolio
Hmm.
allocation. So like it's just a whole nother level exponentially of what kind of cost savings you can realize by applying some of these technologies. So that's a second, big area of
Mhm.
application. But the third, and maybe the most exciting for us as investors that really want to stay on the frontier of innovation,
Mhm.
are using or are looking for some of these business models where AI is the core product. So rather than
Mhm.
just being a feature or a part of the core product, it actually becomes the platform upon which you
Mhm.
build a model. And we haven't seen that, or at least nothing in our portfolio company could I describe as that yet. Like, so the AI is integral, but I think we're very close. And I think there are some very interesting models that are beginning to emerge as AI is the fundamental core.
Okay. Well, that's very helpful. Are there any other questions that I haven't asked you that I should have asked you? Anything else that you wish to share?
No, I would just say, I think there are, there's a lot of, software development, customer service changes. There just is a lot of experimentation
Mhm.
happening that I probably only covered very cursorily in this conversation, and that we're always happy through our writings and through introductions to dive deep if there's ever interest in learning more, either about a particular model, particular region or a particular technology application.
Excellent.